All right. I think I'm on the right microphone now, and I think, unfortunately, the streaming quality won't be very good because it just isn't when you're on live like this. Hello, welcome back. Welcome back. Hopefully everyone will find this. Did my other one launch? Man, what a disaster. Hello. Welcome Vidyahar. Vidyadar even. Okay. So let me see if I can pick up from where we were talking about free will. Okay. So free will is the next question. Hopefully some people will find this stream again. This should stay live now that I'm directly on YouTube. It'll be a little bit crappier, but it is what it is. So can Buddhist thought and practice be understood through a deterministic lens concerning human free will? It seems that determinism is a natural conclusion within Buddhism. I would say no. And give me a moment to explain why I think the answer is no. I think that the answer is no because Buddhism talks about your karma producing the impulse to take certain courses of action. So, as a human being in particular, animals a little bit less so, but as a human being, you have the natural impulse to do certain things. And you will have certain things coming from your karma such that you have a natural inclination. For example, just random example, that my wife hates pickles and olives and not all preserved meats, but some preserved meats. So the sort of preserved from slightly fermented kind of flavor is something she doesn't like. And I don't know that she has any bad experience or reason for this. It's just something that she's sort of wired up not to like. So like this, we have all sorts of preferences and desires and inclinations that aren't really coming from some conscious decision or something we did in this life. According to Buddhism, we are born with a whole smorgasbord, a whole menagerie of inclinations to do certain things. Where free will enters the picture is that you have the inclination to do this, and you actually have a gap where if you're aware of yourself, you can go, you know what, my inclination is driving me in this direction, but I'm actually going to stop and do nothing. Or I'm going to come this way and I'm going to drive in a totally different direction. So according to karmic theory, you have the option to follow your karmic impulses, your previous habits of mind, or not. It's not actually something you're compelled to do beyond your free will, although the desire to follow your impulses is extremely strong. To tie this into the meditation training techniques that I teach, think about the first one. The first one that I teach is intensive breath meditation. Why? And why is it so intense? And why is it so sort of powerful, right? The first technique is put all of your being, your whole life, as if your life depends upon it, upon the breath. Why? Because your impulses are going to try to rip you off the breath for dear life. Yeah. So if you want to gain control over your mind's tendency to chase impulse, you need first to develop really strong willpower. Bang, keep it where you put it. The next technique is body scanning, because this calms the mind down and makes the body less restless. And then the next technique is opening the sense gates. What you're doing with opening the sense gates is making the mind non-reactive, so that it doesn't matter if a beautiful pen appears here and a firebomb appears here. Your mind abides peacefully, simply aware and knowing of whatever appears, like a mirror, just reflecting whatever occurs. And when your consciousness can do this, this is in Buddhist iconography. If you've ever seen those Buddhist statues that are holding a big sword, and they're usually, right, they look quite wrathful. So there's one in Japan called a kala, and a kala is black in color or dark blue, because space is black or dark blue. And consciousness is like space. So it's saying that if you can access the fundamental qualities of consciousness, like being aware of things like a mirror. You can use that like a sword to cut through these powerful impulses that you have. So this is actually a matter of free will. Yeah. Okay. I am going to get to everybody in the chat. Um, so Marco says it fills me with awe and mystery to imagine what the deep layers of consciousness would feel like. You know, also part of the techniques that I teach when I train people, quick plug for my material below. I do have my training courses listed below. If I can get about 10 people to sign up for that, then I can actually survive and pay rent and what have you. And so if you're not signed up, please do, or make a contribution below. Um, the techniques that I teach give you access to the fundamental nature of your 5 external sense consciousnesses. That by itself, because your external sense consciousnesses are non-dual with their objects of experience, will be a life-changing, life-altering experience. One of my students, who's actually a Christian, he's an Orthodox Christian, has been training with me now for about 4 years, and has started having some of these experiences where he goes, I was doing my standing practice and I was opening the visual gate, and all of a sudden it occurred to me that there was no difference between the seer and the seen. There was no difference between the seen and the seer. It was as if what was seen was doing the seeing, and what was seeing was being the seen. You couldn't pull the two apart, and there was no me in between. So vision is non-dual. And I said, yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. That insight directly and experience will change the rest of your life, because it's not what you thought, right? It's not at all what you thought. And it doesn't actually take that much work. If you did 30 minutes of training a day and you did the proper techniques, within a few years you'll start having these experiences. And long before that, your life will be very different than it is now. So, yeah, but even getting in contact with your obvious senses is quite a profound experience. And then once you start looking at consciousness itself, which is something I teach sort of at the end of opening the 5 sense consciousnesses, of course, that's a very profound exercise and experience. Because like the visualized apple, your mind is not located anywhere in particular. It's not in a particular, from a subjective standpoint, okay? For the people who are new. From a subjective standpoint. Oh, cool, yeah. Again, I don't mind that at all, Cleric. From a subjective standpoint, doesn't matter at all. I'm sorry, your mind is not located in any particular location at all. It is existing, seemingly in like empty, infinite space. It doesn't seem to be in one particular location when you look at it in meditation. So that's really surprising. But in my humble view, it doesn't take that much work to get to that experience, relatively speaking. Like a few years doing relatively decent practice and bridging your practice in between, and being an ethical person. And the more you put in, the faster things will happen. So yeah, it's extremely profound. Obviously, I recommend it highly. Okay. I'm still getting through the old chat. So someone said about, Marco said in relation to time, in regards to atemporality. Again, this is one of those subjects that I'm still trying to come to terms with, because I've studied a fair amount about time and change and the dependent arising of time and these sorts of things. But usually I don't like to form a really firm, hard opinion on something until I have enough experience from meditation in particular to go, this is it. This is the correct position, and I have really good reason to think this is it now. And since I haven't had that yet in regards to time, I hesitate to have a strong opinion. But again, I think there are some interesting things to discuss there. The most interesting is that time is basically this ongoing process of change. That's the most important insight, certainly at the stage we are in training. So Vidyadhar Gyalpo says the apophatic method utilized by the Platonists resembles to a degree the reductionist approach. So again, what's interesting about the Platonists is that they are wrestling with the same problem that the Buddhists are wrestling with, but they're coming to a different conclusion. So they're wrestling with this problem that when you look at a mountain, as I was saying before, you can't find the mountain. And if you don't agree with that, then tell me where a mountain begins and ends. I mean, truly, I would like you all to challenge me on this. If you really think that a mountain exists somehow out there, utterly independent of human beings, explain to me what its qualities are. Tell me where it starts and stops. Tell me what makes a boulder not a mountain and what makes the mountain not a boulder. Tell me whether or not the water is part of the mountain or not. Tell me where it starts and stops within the earth. Does it stop in the foothills? Does it what exactly is the mountain that you say is so obvious? So the Platonists are wrestling with this problem. You look at your perception and it seems like there's all this stuff out there, but as soon as you scratch the surface of it, you can't find a single cup. You can't find a single person. You can't find a color. You can't find a shape. One of my advisors was a Western philosopher and analytic philosopher for my PhD, and this would drive her nuts. We would debate. We'd have really, really intense debates on this subject. So, what the Platonists said is, well, when you look at the mountain here, you don't find a mountain. You find some imperfect set of stuff. So to explain the fact that we see a mountain in our perception, we need some ideal mountain that's out there somewhere that projects itself to us. But since it's divine, we can't experience it, and we experience this sort of lesser experience, to put it sort of coarsely. And the Buddhists are saying that's fucking nuts. No, you looked for it and it's not there. So it doesn't exist that way. There's not something inside there that is a mountain. So what is a mountain and where is a mountain? It's a set of parts. It's a set of causes and conditions. It's also has something to do with the one that's looking at the mountain, because you can't find something inside the parts and causes that itself is the mountain. You find rocks and water and trees and plants and fish and whatever. You don't find a mountain amongst the parts or the causes. And so you need some other factor to explain why and in what way the mountain exists as a mountain in a valid way. And what is it that establishes the boundaries of the mountain? And what does all this work? It happens from the side of consciousness. It doesn't happen from the side of the physical stuff. And I don't have time to get into all the minutiae of that, but mountains are real. The boundaries of mountains are real. But a mountain is a subject object. It's not just an object. It is a subject object. That's why you can't find it when you just look at the object or when you just look at the subject. Because the word mountain, that's not a mountain. The concept of a mountain is not a mountain. Those aren't mountains. So none of the things that make it up are a mountain. To say nothing of cars and people and, right? The room you're sitting in, the screen you're looking at. Where is it and what is it? One teacher said he was doing this with a pen. He was analyzing a pen. He said, whatever you do, don't go home and try to put a pen through your eye or something to see the pen, There is a way to solve this problem, but you can't solve it by inventing magical castles in the sky and mountains in the realms of devas to explain it. You know, that won't actually explain it. You've just added one more thing you can't explain. Okay, I've been rambling now. Let's go back to the beginning of questions. About the previous question of another viewer, I personally think Yogacar's interpretation of the beginningless beginning of an individual mental continuum is really interesting. According to this theory, our seventh consciousness have, since beginningless time, mistakenly taken our eighth consciousness to be our true selves. Yeah. So in the school that I trained in, we study the Indian Buddhist tenant systems as a pedagogy for meditative training as a practitioner, not as a history of those views. And actually, when you look at both the Tibetan pedagogies of Indian views and you look at the Indian views themselves, you find that they don't all agree with each other. There are actually a bunch of different views, and and then if you look at the Chinese canon, you find even more views. And so there's a lot of debates and discussions and so forth. And so brilliantly, I think, Lama Tsongkhapa, in the creation of the Gelug lineage, and some of his people that carried on with his lineage from his time, took all of these viewpoints that were sort of this scattered mess of ideas, to put it maybe a bit too indecently, and they said, okay, rather than spending your whole life investigating the minutia of all these things without any organization, what if we just arrange them into topics that are really relevant for you understanding how to get out of suffering? What if we just arrange these views in a certain way so that the views you will naturally fall into as a practitioner are the views we're explaining through the use of these different schools? And I think that's a really clever way to do it. And also, by studying those schools in a particular way, you can gain insights into how your mind works and how perception works and how emptiness and dependent origination work. And I think that's a much better way to approach all of these subjects, because the debates are crazy. You could spend a whole lifetime just studying the debates. I've tried to train with this reactivity to impulses in meditation. When I get an itch, I pause to think, do I need to scratch it? Most of the times the answer is no, and it slowly ends. Yeah. If you're training with the tactile sense gate, Marco, if you're training using the tactile sense gate, what you'll find is that as you get better at resting with the full tactile gate open, the sensation that would normally be an itch is just sensations. It's not an itch. By the time it's an itch, you've already added a self, an other, a relationship between the two. You've labeled it as uncomfortable, painful, unwanted. Like, you've done a lot of work for it to be an itch that you don't want to experience. So when you have opened the tactile sense gate and you're resting in the nature of the tactile consciousness, there's no such thing as an itch, even when the sensations that would normally be conceptually labeled as an itch are present. And this is something I tried to explain to someone else recently on one of the other streams or something, is that pain is not the same when you have opened the tactile sense gate and pulled back concepts, because concepts are part of what makes pain painful. And so through doing body scanning, as weird as it sounds, by becoming even more aware of the actual sensations of pain, it stops being painful. And there's cognitive tests for this. There's cognitive psychological tests backing this up. This is not just a weird meditator thing. This is why they advise people that have chronic pain, and I do. I have a bad shoulder. They advise them to do body scanning. Okay. What do you think of Charles Goodman's take about Buddhism being hard, deterministic? I answered that, didn't I? There is an agent. That was kind of the whole point of the recent video I put up on Christianity and Buddhism. There is an agent. And there's a mountain. I mean, the mountain's huge. It's millions of years old. It's right in front of you. It just doesn't exist the way that you think it does. That doesn't mean there's no mountain. When you look at yourself, it's obvious, it's huge, it's right in front of you. It's maybe not millions of years old, but you've had it around for a while. You've been riding around in this unit for a while, and that self appears just in exactly the same way as the mountain. The mountain, and you investigate the mountain, it doesn't exist the way it appears. Obviously, doesn't the way it appears. So there is an agent, but the agent is not who you think it is. You're made up of, in Buddhism, they would say 5 aggregates, but really you're made up of the body and mind and some non associated compositional factors, as we say in Buddhism, which are things that aren't the body and aren't the mind, like karmic seeds and non composed space and other interesting Buddhisty things. So you're made up of this sort of stuff. So who is the agent? The agent is consciousness. Your mind is the one making the decisions and chasing stuff and not chasing stuff. That's the agent. That's the one making all the decisions. But the problem is you think there's a you in addition to the mind. In the same way that you think there's a mountain in addition to all the parts making up the mountain. And you think there are really clear boundaries to where you begin and end, in the same way that you think there are really clear boundaries to where the mountain begins and ends. But there isn't. There isn't. There's no such thing. I have a huge chapter in my thesis on this whole argument. Every aspect of the human entity has fuzzy boundaries. They're less obvious because they're small. But do you know you're basically a tube? You're a tube that goes from here, goes in one direction. Yeah, it's kind of weird to think about. But there's an outside bit that runs through the middle that isn't you. And if that hole that went all the way through you wasn't there, you couldn't be alive. It's very strange. And then your blood is running through the body, but it's carrying a lot of things that aren't you. It's carrying nutrients that it hasn't absorbed yet, or wastes that it hasn't excreted yet. Those aren't you. That's just stuff. So now there's a whole bunch of not you floating around inside of you, even at the physical level. That's weird, isn't it? So where do you start and stop exactly? At what exact point, when your body is excreting something that it thinks it no longer needs into the bowel or the kidneys or out through the skin, etc., exactly at what moment does it stop being you and start being not you? This is like the mountain problem. So the agent doesn't exist the way that you see the agent existing, but there is an agent. The agent is all of the parts making you up, in particular the mind. You are the stuff that makes you up. But you're not simply the stuff that makes you up of itself, which is a very challenging subject. In other words, when you look at all the parts of the mountain together, that's also not the mountain. If it was, then when you added a part or took a part away, the mountain would go out of existence, and it doesn't. So it's not simply the parts. There's also another element, but again, we don't have time to go through the entire set of arguments here on a Saturday afternoon. In any case, there is an agent, but the agent doesn't exist the way it appears, to put it briefly. And in particular, free will is a function of your mind, your consciousness. So your mind is the thing that can ultimately freely decide to do something rather than following the impulse that happened to come up in the mind. Ooh, right. Wow, covering a lot of ground. Okay, if there's no soul or self, what is it that gets passed on in rebirth? It seems to imply that there are individual separations between sentient beings, right? So the concept of a soul is actually a really fascinating one. So when you look at the biblical basis for the concept of a soul, there is, of course, this word essence used from time to time, but quite a bit of the biblical literature on the term soul means the thing that makes you alive, which correlates with an Indian, just conceptually correlates, not in terms of history, right? I don't think they borrowed these from each other. but it conceptually correlates with an Indian concept called prana, that there is something that makes a living thing alive and a dead thing not alive. Yeah. And so there's that aspect. The other aspect is consciousness. The thing that carries your personality, your interests, your drives as a person, etc. All of this, according to Christian texts, according to actual biblical passages, that's what your soul is. So I'm not actually sure that the concept of a soul in its entirety is completely out of alignment with what Buddhists say is passing from lifetime to lifetime. Because what Buddhists say passes from lifetime to lifetime is your karma, your subtle winds that come along with the mind, your subtle prana, your subtle chi, that comes along with consciousness and consciousness. So if there's no self, so we have to differentiate between self is actually a technical term, okay? This is what really screws up a lot of people. You do have a self, but the type of self you think exists doesn't exist. And because you have this misapprehension, misunderstanding, misperception of how you exist, you have all sorts of emotional problems. All of your problems actually come from the fact that you see yourself existing in a way that you don't exist. You exist in a different way than this, according to Buddhism. So when you look at the mountain as an example, it looks like the mountain exists out there and has nothing to do with you. It looks like it exists in and of itself, been there for millions of years, took a long time to get here, nothing to do with human beings. Wasn't it there before consciousness even got turned up on the planet? How could it have anything to do with me? But then you ask, where does the mountain end? And your mind just goes crazy because it doesn't end anywhere in particular. Where does it start? Doesn't start anywhere in particular. What is the external boundary for it? In other words, if a boulder breaks off from the mountain, when does it stop being the mountain and start just being a rock on the mountain? No clear answer. Why? Because being a mountain has something to do with consciousness, not just the physical parts making up a mountain. And I don't have time to get into the full argument, but I think I've said enough for you to know that it can't just be existing as a mountain in and of itself out there, right? So in the same way, you see yourself as existing in and of yourself without depending upon causes and conditions. That self doesn't exist. An independent self doesn't exist. But a self that is dependent does exist. And the self who's dependent is the one having this conversation with me remotely, digitally, by chat and video right now. That self is real and does exist. The trouble is that we have baked into our perception is so much error, so many problems. Our emotions go completely crazy all day long. And that leads us into non-virtue, into things that hurt us and hurt other people. And according to Buddhist thought, that then leads to karma, which then leads to negative rebirths, which then leads to being separated from the conditions in which you can train yourself to be free. And according to the Buddha, sentient beings are like a blind turtle living at the bottom of the seven oceans. It comes up for air once every 100 years up to a nice rebirth, but on the surface of the seven oceans is a life, let's just call it a life preserver, okay? Somewhere on the surface of the seven oceans is a life preserver. Teachings that can actually get you out of suffering. And to encounter those teachings by accident is like a blind turtle putting its head through the life preserver by accident while it floats on the seven oceans. So you have this incredibly rare, brief opportunity to do something about this problem, according to Buddhism, that has plagued you since beginningless time. What is passing from lifetime to lifetime? The mind stream, a causal series of events, of mental events, that is not physical. And along with or associated with that mind stream are the karmas of that individual mind stream. So this is what makes you different from other people, because other people don't have the same karmic potentials as you. Okay. Tsongkhapa's commentaries on the Middle Way tradition are really amazing. I agree. There's two fairly sizable challenges for any aspiring Prasangika gunslinger. One is this whole issue of pramana. How is it, for example, that you know what a mountain is, despite the fact that a mountain has no inherent identity and no inherent properties? How is it possible for you to correctly identify a mountain in your experience when the mountain itself doesn't have an identity of being a mountain out there, and none of the properties of the object itself, collectively or individually, make it into a mountain out there? How is it that you know what it is? According to every other school of Buddhism, there's a little bit more going on out there, to put it mildly, that helps explain how it is that you identify what a mountain is. And Prasangikas, the consequentialists, say, no, actually, if you analyze any aspect of this phenomenon, you won't find any, not just an identity like being a mountain. That's an identity, right? That's an entity. Not only can you not find that, but you can't find properties, character, which you might sort of glom onto the identity, right? So what kind of properties might you glom onto the identity? Being tall, let's say. The mountain is tall, isn't it? Well, what does tall mean? What makes something tall or not tall? If tall means that it's a taller than other objects, that mountain is like, if you looked at Earth from space, the Earth is, especially from a bit of a distance, is so flat, actually, on its surface. It's about as, if we could make the Earth the size of a pool cue, if you're playing pool, if we could make the Earth the size of a pool cue, the tallest mountain on Earth would be within the range of imperfections you would expect to find on a pool cue. In other words, it would be imperceptibly smooth to you as a human being if we could make the Earth the size of a pool ball. Pool ball, not a pool cue. So, is Mount Everest tall? By what measure exactly? Well, it depends on how far you zoom out, I guess. But since it depends on how far you zoom out, being tall is not an intrinsic property of the mountain. It's something that depends upon the perspective you take. And since it's something that depends on the perspective you take, it can't be innate to the object. Well, what about its mass? It has a certain amount of mass that's inherent to the object. Well, that depends on what you're including as part of the mountain or not. Because if you're including the water, it has a different mass. If you're including the rocks that have broken loose, that's included. That mass is included. Furthermore, if we're talking about special relativity, depending upon how fast you happen to be moving relative to the mountain when you're making the measurement, will change the mass of the mountain, or vice versa. How fast the mountain is moving relative to you will change the mass of the mountain. So it doesn't have one set of properties. It has numerous sets of properties depending upon who you are, what kind of perspective you've taken, blah, blah, blah. So not only is it not a mountain, it's like not tall and not short and not dark and not light. And, and yet it is those things. And that's not a contradiction. Those things exist as subject objects, which is why when you look for them just in the object, you can't find them. And when you look for them just in the subject, you can't find them. You can only find them existing as a relationship, what's called a mutual existence between subject and object. When the mind has taken a certain standpoint and has imputed certain concepts or imputed certain non-conceptual information onto the object, it does exist that way. How do you know? Because it can function. If it didn't exist that way, it wouldn't function. That would be like saying if you imputed motor car onto a screwdriver, you could drive it. No, that doesn't work. So even though the screwdriver doesn't have an inherent set of properties, you can't impute anything on it and have it just be that. So there is something there from the side of physical reality. It's not all in your head. If it was all in your head, you could just change your mind and reality would change, but it doesn't. Whew. Okay. I didn't expect to get into Prasangika today. So Marco says he's not at the place where he can open the tactile gate and pain is not painful because the itch pulls his mind almost like it's glowing or shining brightly. Yeah. As you get better at body scanning and opening the tactile sense gate and resting the mind or abiding the mind in the nature of tactile consciousness, less and less, it'll be less and less that your mind gets pulled to particular aspects of the experience because you'll get used to abiding in the nature of that consciousness. When I say that, I hope people know what I mean. I'm not just like speaking mystical nonsense. What I mean is that what a consciousness does, thinking about vision, for example, you're looking at the screen. Vision, your eyes take in light, then your visual consciousness generates an image that it thinks matches as best it can the data of the senses that came through the eyes, and then it generates an image over here of the screen. And so actually what's being seen and the consciousness that are seeing it are one entity. They're one thing. They're not two different things. Well, actually, sorry, they're not one entity. Words. They're not one thing, but they are one entity. They are two aspects, non-dual, right? Non-dual. Two aspects of one thing. So since what appears and the consciousness that it's appearing to are one entity, what consciousness does is, to now go back to the original point, consciousness gives rise to an experience, is aware of that experience, and that's it. So anything else your mind does is actually not, for example, tactile awareness. So tactile awareness generates the experience over here and then is aware of or experiences the experience. The experience itself uh, is not wanted or unwanted. That's not what tactile awareness does. It doesn't want things and it doesn't reject things. It just generates and is aware of. That's it. Generates and is aware of. That's it. So if it comes to the point where you're going, I want this, that's mental consciousness. That's mental awareness, not tactile awareness. If you go, I don't want this, that's mental awareness or consciousness. That's not your tactile awareness. Your tactile awareness doesn't care. How do you know? Because if your tactile awareness cared, it wouldn't produce a lot of pain, would it? It would just produce pleasure all the time. Because pleasure is nice. So your awarenesses are like a mirror that is ready to just simply reflect and cause an appearance of whatever happens to be appearing in the mirror. It doesn't care if it's good or bad or neutral. And then mental consciousness is the one that goes, oh, I don't like that part. I love that part. Oh, that part I don't really care. So the chasing or the running away or the being indifferent comes from mental consciousness, not from the five external senses. All right. This is another reason why I teach opening the five sense gates as one of the initial techniques, because if you can learn to abide in the nature of one of or all five of the external sense consciousnesses, you'll gain a lot of insight into who and what you are and what makes you up as a being. Right. I once donated gold to the Joa statue that Tsongkhapa himself said was said to have placed a 5 Buddha crown upon. That experience was truly amazing. Yeah, the Jowo is the Jowo one. This one of the statues that Tsongkhapa said looked like him. I know there's a Guru Rinpoche statue that Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava said, "Ah, that one looks like me." I can't remember. Or oh no, the Jowo statue is a big Buddha statue, isn't it? I can't remember now. Marco says, "Oh, I see. I hadn't seen the relationship between consciousness explained like this before. Very elucidating." Yeah, this is actually, in terms of the relationship between consciousness and physical experiences, this is actually something known from cognitive science too. There's a video I'm going to comment on soon where a group of cognitive scientists who each specialize in a different sensory experience are giving a talk on how your mind doesn't present the world to you when it presents each of your sensory experiences. It's a really fascinating Buddhist kind of talk where they're saying what is presented to you is sort of like, in some sense, it's like a hallucination, but it's a controlled hallucination where you're not seeing what's there, you're seeing something that your mind has generated to help you get through the day. And of course, they have an evolutionary explanation, not a Buddhist explanation. But and there are some funny examples because you see this in nature too. In Australia, for example, there's a beetle. There's a beetle that evolved to know that shiny green things means that it's a really attractive beetle, a really attractive female beetle. And so the males were starting to stopped mating with the females because Australians were going out to the countryside and they were throwing their beer bottles onto the countryside and had these shiny green beer bottles laying everywhere. And so the males were going, "Oh, this is like the most attractive female I've ever seen." And so they were all trying to mate with the bottle instead of mating with females because the bottle was green and shiny, and that's all that evolution had set them up to look for when looking for a female. And they couldn't tell the difference between a female beetle and a beer bottle. It almost put them into extinction. They had to change the color of beer bottles in Australia. Anyways, humans do this too. We do this all the time. There's fun experiments that show you that this is true. Yeah. Yeah. So what you're experiencing, for example, as a room that you happen to be sitting in, we might laugh at the Beatles, but I bet the things we chase don't look. Yeah, there's actually a whole bunch of. Well, let me finish my thought first. So the room you're sitting in is not the room. The room you're sitting in is your mind. There is a physical room, but you never see it. What you see is your mind. The voice that you're hearing is not my voice. The voice that you're hearing is not my voice. And gets stimulated through the senses by vibration or